In today's episode of Locked On NBA, we're going to be talking about the Basketball Hall of Fame enshrinements over the weekend. Hey, let's get stuck straight into it.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're back for another show on a Monday. My name is Josh Lloyd. I'm also the host of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast. I'm the lead analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. The Basketball Hall of Fame was over the weekend. So let's get some thoughts on some of the players who were enshrined there. And we'll talk to John Karalis of Locked On Celtics, because a couple of Celtics were mentioned or were enshrined into the Hall of Fame. Let's get him. Let's bring him in right now. Before I bring him in, today's show is brought to you by SweatBlock. SweatBlock is the doctor-created and doctor-recommended antiperspirant formula that helps you deal with excessive sweating, hyperhidrosis. This is a problem that's really embarrassing, whether you're in school, work, social settings, whatever it is. This is a problem that can be eliminated. With SweatBlock, you get the wipes, you put them on under your arm, and it works for up to 7 days. Put them on at night, next morning, wake up, wash as per usual, and you are ready to go without that constant fear of, hey, what color shirt am I wearing? Can you see the sweat patches? Is it happening all over the place? Am I getting embarrassed? Are people looking and laughing? SweatBlock covers that up for you. They've been around for over 10 years. You can buy them at Amazon. You can buy them at CVS, but you can also get them at sweatblock.com. And if you use our promo code LOCKEDON, you will save 20%. So head to SweatBlock, sweatblock.com, use our promo code LOCKEDON and save 20% on the wipes and all their other products to help you deal with excessive sweating. Today's show is also brought to you by DirecTV Stream. We have this problem. We watch live sports in one spot and we have other things that we watch on demand in other areas. We watch highlights on our phone. It's all over the place. It's such a mess, such a hassle. Well, there's a way you can get all of your entertainment together in one spot, and that is called DirecTV Stream. It brings your live and on-demand favorites together all in one place. So you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and TV shows in one spot. No more juggling remotes and no need to buy another device ever again. You can get it all just in one spot. The best part, there's no annual contract. That means get rid of the clutter and get rid of the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required and content varies by package. Bring him in now. The host of the Locked On Celtics podcast, John Karalis, is here with me. John, the Basketball Hall of Fame over the weekend. A couple of Celtics were involved in that process. Interestingly, Bill Russell was inducted again for a second time, this time as a coach. A little bit weird that they do it separately there. I just thought he's in. But he's in a second time as a coach. And then, of course, Paul Pierce, Celtics legend, has been inducted into the Hall of Fame. I guess a little bit of positive press for Paul Pierce after some of his other social faux pas over the past, I don't even know how long. It's been a wild time. But for Celtics fans in general, how do they hold Pierce? What sort of regard are they holding Paul Pierce in? Because I think he gets a little bit overlooked in areas of basketball fandom that aren't Boston-centric. How does Boston view Paul Pierce?
Pierce is held in a very high regard right now, especially now. I think the beauty of Paul Pierce is kind of how human his story is. Why Boston loves Paul Pierce is he has a bit of a story of redemption. And the first few years of his career, he was this brash, cocky kid who couldn't quite handle things the way he probably should have without that professionalism. He was part of one of the worst Team USA performances that we've seen, and things were going pretty poorly for him in Boston. And there was a point there where he thought he was going to get traded. He was almost moved to Portland. Danny Ainge was really shopping him hard to try to trade him on draft night to get Chris Paul. And none of that materialized. And what Pierce did was he kind of made amends with Doc Rivers. They butted heads pretty hard. And that moment of making amends with Doc Rivers really helped turn things around, because then they turned around and got Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen. And to have Pierce up there holding that Finals MVP trophy, it was a good full circle for him, and kind of he went from a guy that a lot of Boston wanted traded to kind of a lovable Boston hero. So his journey is part of what makes him so special.
Is there any animosity is the wrong word, but thoughts on the way that I guess his career ended, going to Brooklyn, Washington, the Clippers there at the end, or was that just sort of disregarded now that we're a few years removed from it?
Yeah, I think the further we get away from it, the more we forget. I think when you saw him come back to Boston as a Clipper and hit that last 3-pointer, that as he walked off the Garden floor for the last time, that reaction said everything as an answer to this. Boston fans kind of don't care. They understood what the business was, and while I think Boston would have loved to have had him here for his entire career, the flip side is he was part of a trade to Brooklyn that turned around and gave the Celtics Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and this current iteration of the Celtics very heavily connected to Paul Pierce. So that lineage continues on. That Paul Pierce effect is still here in the fact that Tatum and Brown are part of the team as a result of that trade.
Yeah, I never really thought about it that way, that he was a part of that deal that did net those picks from Brooklyn to get Jaylen and Jason onto the team now. We've talked about Bill Russell as a part of that, but again, he's been in the Hall of Fame for ages, and now he is in there as a coach. But there are other players in this Hall of Fame class, and I think one of the most interesting ones, and one of the guys who gave the best speech there at the Hall of Fame was probably Chris Bosh, a guy that was a contemporary of Paul Pierce throughout their careers. Now, you're not on your Locked On Celtics podcast here, John, so you can give an honest answer without having Celtics fans completely destroy you. Who do you think was a better player, Chris Bosh or Paul Pierce?
Oh, man. That's tough. I kind of put them at an equal level. I think Bosh was different, and I don't think Bosh was ever fully realized. I think he always had to adjust his game, especially in the Miami days. It was always obviously LeBron, and obviously it's Dwayne Wade, and he had to adjust the most. Kind of like what Ray Allen did in Boston. So I can't pick one over the other. I'm not going to sit there and say Pierce was definitively better than Bosh. Bosh was, he's a Hall of Famer, obviously, for obvious reasons. So I can't say one was better than the other. I'll say that I'll take the cop-out answer and say they were both about the same level. Bosh was great, but I think Pierce and Bosh belong in that just kind of tier below. Like, we know that they're not LeBron. We know that they're not Michael Jordan. But you can still be that tier below and be one of the all-time greats, and I think that's where they belong.
I'm not sure if Paul Pierce knows that he isn't LeBron, but that's another discussion for
that's what makes him. Paul Pierce does not like LeBron James.
No, he does
not.
So
it's one of my favorite little running subplots.
Yeah, he is. He's not afraid to say some things about LeBron. But in terms of Bosh, yeah, that Ray Allen comparison is really good because obviously Allen was putting up huge numbers in Milwaukee and Seattle before he came across to Boston and had to take that step back. And much like Bosh was doing in Toronto with those big numbers. And I think if we saw the player that Chris Bosh was in Miami, where he stepped up his defense and he became a three-point shooting threat, but put him back into the role that he had in Toronto, people would view his career a little bit differently. They'd have him, because people go, oh, Chris Bosh, was he actually that good? And people make comparisons of players now, and they go, oh, maybe he becomes Chris Bosh. I go, do you understand how good Chris Bosh actually was? But if we saw the way he evolved in Miami and put him back into a number one role while having those skills, I think people would have viewed him quite differently there, because he took his game in his prime to this next level, but it was so muted behind those other guys.
It was, first of all, he started out in Toronto, right? And the NBA is not going to put Toronto on national TV. Their TV ratings don't count, so they get minimized. So you have that. It took a long time for Toronto to even be a major force, right? Even when they were good, they're not seen as good as they really were. And then Bosh, when he gets into the national spotlight and everybody gets a chance to see him, he's your third option, and he never really got a chance to see. I think the blood clotting issues, the issues that have forced his medical retirement, really hurt his chances to kind of break out of shadows. We never really get to see the full Chris Bosh impact and what he could have been, because I think Bosh with a higher usage rate certainly could have been a little bit more dynamic. And yeah, you heard him talking about the first time he shot 5 threes, he was like, oh, this is kind of nice. And people want to say that Bosh was one of the forefathers of the big men who shoot. I think it goes a little further back. It actually goes back to Kevin Garnett, but he's in that lineage. And I think if we got to see that full impact, the full Chris Bosh experience, because stretch fives and stretch fours are so important nowadays, we would have had a lot more comparisons to like, yep, there's another Chris Bosh out there. His name, the comparison certainly would have been a lot greater.
Other guys that were enshrined, we don't want to give everyone a short shrift as we're talking, Paul Pierce and Chris Bosh here. Chris Webber, probably the next biggest name there. It seemed weird that he hadn't been in the Hall of Fame already, but he was a dominant powerhouse back in his day after being that number 1 overall pick back in the mid-90s. He finally gets in there. Ben Wallace is there. Rick Adelman, Jay Wright, Australia's greatest basketballer, Lauren Jackson, is in there as well. Yolanda Griffith, Val Ackerman, Cotton Fitzsimmons, Howard Garfinkel, Fats Jenkins, Bob Dandridge, Pearl Moore, and Toni Kukoc is in there. Now, Toni Kukoc, another one of those guys that I think the major reason he's in there, John, is international play, but he was unbelievable in the NBA. And much like Chris Bosh, you talk about shooting big men and shooting fours, that's exactly what he did when he came across to the Bulls. His role was so marginalized playing next to Scotty and Michael, but he was really, really good, and he fit that role, and he was a key part in those championships.
Yeah, you heard, was it Sam Smith, the Bulls, the Bulls guy who maybe took it a bit too far and said that Kukoc would have been Luka if he didn't have to play behind
not sure about that.
Michael and Scotty. Maybe a bit too far. But I get what he was trying to say in that I think, especially back then, he was the first kind of, or in that first wave of like the big international deals, the Drazen Petrovic, the Arvydas Sabonis. He was in that first kind of real big wave. So I think he was kind of one of those stereotype breakers that probably I wish could have gotten a little bit more shine to show that Euros weren't soft and weren't whatever, all those stereotypes that they tried to impart on those guys back then. Yeah, he could have been a lot more on his own, just like a lot of these guys. But I think his legacy is I don't want to say tainted, but it's clouded by the whole connection to Michael and Scotty. First of all, when the Dream Team made it a point to shut him down at every turn, and then his time in Chicago, and then even the Scottie Pippen kind of storming off, refusing to get off the bench because Phil Jackson called a final play for Kukoc instead of Scotty, and that whole thing. So it's a little unfair, and I think that colors a lot of what people's opinions are going to be of Kukoc, especially, in America, where a lot of people forget that it's the Basketball Hall of Fame. They just think of it as the NBA Hall of Fame. And you get a little bit of like, oh, really? Him? He was a tremendous player. And there's a reason why he was in that first wave of Europeans to come on over and have a major impact.
Well, John, thanks for coming on and chatting about the Basketball Hall of Fame. When I did the intro to this show, I stuffed it up. I called it the NBA Hall of Fame. I had to go redo that. No, it's not the NBA Hall of Fame. It is the Basketball Hall of Fame. Of course, John is hosting Locked On Celtics, and you can check him out over there, and hosts Locked On NBA one day a week as well. Thanks for coming on and chatting Basketball Hall of Fame with me.
My pleasure, man. Anytime.